This month's Where Did the Road Go is brought to you by three wonderful people, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, and 36 Dingo. It is also made possible by all of my Patreons, and if you want to become a patron, www.wheredidtheroadgo.com.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I have back with me Mr. Charles Lear.
Hi, Seriah.
And you share that last name with other people involved in the UFO field.
Yes, I do.
There's other Lears.
Yeah, Lear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I possibly very distantly related, not closely enough to have any financial benefit from Bill Lear's wonderful inventions.
So let's talk about Albert Bender.
Okay.
Because he's a fascinating character.
Right on. Yeah, Bender actually first got his name in the paper because he had a fascination with things creepy, outre. And he lived in his stepfather's attic. His mother had just died. His mother had died, and so he was still there. He had a job at the Aime Michel company as the chief timekeeper. And oddly, he had 20 clocks in his living space, and they would go off every 15 minutes. And it was just like one part of his eccentric nature.
I don't know how you could stand that.
Yeah, it's maddening. And so, I'm not sure if it was a nod to his profession as the timekeeper at Aime Michel Company, but it was just one of his many eccentricities. So he decorated his attic space with skeletons and monsters and rubber snakes and rubber spiders. And he used to invite friends up to what he called his Chamber of Horrors. And he would play these records of haunted house sounds. And that gave him a great deal of pleasure. But it got the interest of the local paper up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the Sunday Herald. And they put an article out just covering his whole, covering his Chamber of Horrors. And so that's the first time he came to public attention. But then he started getting interested in flying saucers. So he put an ad in Amazing Stories. Not an ad. He put out a notice in Amazing Stories saying, he's looking for investigators. And Gray Barker actually contacted him. No, it wasn't Amazing Stories. It was Other Worlds.
Okay.
At the December 1952 issue of Other Worlds. So Gray Barker contacted him, and he wanted to become a member of the International Flying Saucer Bureau, as Bender called it. And Bender said, well, why don't you be the state representative for West Virginia? So this cute little organization quickly went international. So truly was the International Flying Saucer Bureau. And it was the first to do so. He put out his first publication of Space Review in October 1952. And, it took off from there. Not a whole lot of great investigations, but, lists of stories. And in any case, it didn't last just a little over a year. Actually, October 1953, the Space Review, he called his fellow members and said, Barker in particular, and said, look, don't accept any more memberships until you read the October issue of Space Review in 1953. And in that Space Review, he had this announcement under the headline "Statement of Importance." And it goes, the mystery of flying saucers is no longer a mystery. The source is already known, but any information about this is being withheld by orders from a higher source. We would like to print the full story in Space Review, but because of the nature of the information, we are sorry that we have been advised in the negative. We advise those engaged in saucer work to please be very cautious. So that was it. And he shut down the Bureau. He put out a few more issues of Space Review for members who didn't want refunds, but saucers are not even mentioned, and it's all about space. And then he closed up shop. So his fellow members wanted to know what was going on, and he came up with the story that he had been visited by 3 men in black who told him to quit looking into the saucers. And that was it. And that's all he would say. He wouldn't tell them, you said you know the mystery, but he just, that was it. He got out of the saucer biz after that. Until later in 1962, when through Barker's Saucerian Press, he published Flying Saucer and the 3 Men. And in this version, the 3 men in black are 3 creatures with glowing eyes from the planet Kazik, Kazik. He would feel in the book, he describes feeling a sharp pain in his head, and then these 3 men in black would appear. So he also describes having 3 space maidens come in and rub him all over with with some kind of gel. I think it was supposed to be some sort of antibiotic for space travel as they took him up in their ship. And he describes himself being stiff as a board. And they rubbed him all over. No part of my body was spared. So, and needless to say, the book was met with a bit of dubiousness.
Well, what's interesting, I mean, that kind of started the Men in Black thing to a degree, too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And and Barker went on to play that up in The Silver Bridge, his book about the things going down in West Virginia during the Mothman mystery, which he actually put out before Keel's The Mothman Prophecies. So, yeah, both Barker and Keel really played up the Men in Black thing. But, Keel actually claimed that, he was getting real reports from people being visited by Men in Black. So it's one of those weird things, maybe, created by Bender. And then if the phenomena is reflective, Men in Black became a real thing.
Right. Well, and it's fairly certain that the military played that up as well.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, they have something there where they can interrogate people and make it seem like it's not them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But Bender went on to form the Max Steiner Appreciation Society. Max Steiner was a film composer, and so he was out of the saucer biz. He lived to a ripe old age. I think he died maybe in the might have been as late as the 90s. Yeah, I think he's buried in California, and his middle name remains a mystery, at least to me. I looked on his. You can often when I'm looking for middle names, you can find him on Find a Grave, and his grave marker still has Albert K. Bender. So
yeah,
I speculated in the book that maybe his middle name was Kazik.
My occasional co-host Ren had made the connection between the 3 men that he sees in certain occult experiences where you interact with these 3 dark entities, and he often wondered if that was actually what Bender experienced, was this sort of occultic sort of experience, but he just attributed it to aliens,
So yeah, if it's fun, if people. I don't know. Me personally, when people speak seriously about Albert K. Bender actually encountering Men in Black and being into, somebody claimed to have seen an altar set up in his in a picture of his attic space. If you listen to was to give a speech at a I forget which UFO convention it was, but he sent a tape along, and you can hear that tape, and you hear his squirrely little voice. You'll think twice.
I mean, just
he
the
has
fact
this really nasal voice like this. I never gave any money to you. He has this great story about how after meeting the Men in Black, he started having mysterious powers, and that people like this guy. He loaned a friend some money, and then the friend avoided him, and then he approached him and said, why are you avoiding me? And, why aren't you, where's the money you owe me, basically? And the guy said, I never, and he goes, I never gave any money to you.
That audio,
never.
Go ahead.
I'm saying, yeah, I never got any money from you. And then the guy, he wished ill upon the guy, and the guy got into a car crash and bled to death, and he was hidden in the woods off the road. Nobody could see him, so he died a horrible death. And he tells a few stories like that. So
Aaron Gullius uses that as the opening for the Saucer Life. I don't know if he still uses it. He was using it at one point.
Yeah. That's where I'll absolutely give it to him. That's where I first heard the story. But the tape is pretty hysterical. But
So let's talk about Aime Michel and Jacques Vallee. They pop up around this time too. By the way, your book, for anyone who missed it from last week, is called The Flying Saucer Investigators.
Mm-hmm.
And it is out everywhere, and it is a very good book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So what's this published through?
Flying Disc Press.
Okay.
Yeah, that's Philip Mantle's publishing company. So Philip Mantle just fairly recently published the book, Calvin Parker's book.
Oh, okay.
And did very well with that. So I think it's Aime Michel.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. 1954, there was a French wave where there were all these humanoid reports coming out. This got the attention of the American saucer community. It's really the first time, humanoid reports weren't that widespread. And then afterwards, the American report investigators started looking into them more. And then right in 1955, America had the Kelly Hopkinsville incident with the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins.
Yeah.
So, yeah, humanoids really got on the map in 1954 from France. And at the time, Aime Michel had just published a book, The Truth About Flying Saucers. I'm not going to mangle the French title of it.
That's fine.
But it was published right before the onslaught of the reports. So he was France's UFO expert, flying saucer expert at the time. And he was the go-to guy. Also at the time, young Jacques Vallee became interested in flying saucers. He had a sighting with his mother that he writes about. I think he wrote about it in Forbidden Science. But yeah, a classic saucer with a bubble dome on it.
Yeah.
And
if I remember right, a bunch of people from his village also saw it. It wasn't just him.
Yeah. Oh, actually, yeah, that actually shows up in Jeffrey Kripal's book, Authors of the Impossible. That's where I got that story from.
Okay, I think it is in Forbidden Science as well.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah, there were. It really started with a guy, Marius Dewilde, reported seeing two short guys, and he flashed a light, and he thought he saw a reflection off of a helmet, a glass helmet with a head that seemed especially large. Then they got into the side of an object. A blinding light came out. In the first newspaper articles, he reported being paralyzed by fear. The object shot off, and that was it. But as the story went from paper to paper, paralyzed by fear became him being paralyzed by the beam of light.
Right.
But yeah, they I actually don't talk about this part in the book. They checked for evidence and found some deep indentations and some railroad ties about where he said the saucer was. To make them, it would have had to have been they concluded it would have had to have been a good deal of weight. So yeah, the things took off, and people were reporting them all over the country.
And one of the things you talk about too, though, is that the ufologists in the U.S. weren't interested in humanoids so much, but you had tons of sightings in France, but the only stuff they were really interested here in was the actual lights in the sky type of stuff.
Jim and Coral Lorenzen and APRO actually took to them immediately. They had no problem with humanoid reports. They liked them, as long as they didn't talk.
Yeah, another weird line to draw.
Yeah, well, it's because the contactees were really turning what had started into some, a serious mystery into a circus. The serious saucerologists really wanted to keep their distance, not be part of the laughing stock. Keyhoe at NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, Keyhoe really, really stayed away from humanoid reports to his detriment. His membership hammered him constantly for cases he would ignore. Yeah, the Jim and Coral Lorenzens took right to it. And also Civilian Saucer Intelligence, New York, a very early group as well, that approached it with a very scientific. They were a very serious group, presaging groups like SCU, now the Scientific Coalition for Ufology, or now a U-apology. They really set the model for that. They actually translated Aime Michel's books into English. And one in particular was Flying Saucers and the Straight Line Mystery. Michel perceived a pattern that sightings were reported. If he marked them on the map, they seemed to form straight lines. He called this orthotony. And he surmised from this that they were doing an organized survey in a grid pattern. And as a flap would go on, it would all of a sudden the pattern would go away and it would go random. And he hypothesized that this was because they were doing some follow-up visits, spots they just wanted to revisit, and then that would make the pattern appear random. So they were follow-up surveys after the organized grid search survey. Grid pattern survey. I
wonder if anyone looked into that and the incidence of fault lines in France, because Paul Devereaux showed, at least in the UK, that UFO sightings tended to follow fault lines.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm still, think the jury should be out on earthquake lights. I think there's a lot to that, and I'm into geology, and putting that much pressure on quartz, especially if you got a really big vein of quartz, I can imagine that's piezoelectric.
Yeah.
I think there's something to that, but nobody's proven it.
Yeah, but there's little doubt that there are earthquake lights. I mean, they're seen pretty consistently prior to earthquakes. But I mean, there might also be something to do with plasma consciousness in there too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because you got stuff like the Marfa lights and things like that seem to behave as if they're conscious.
But Hestalin, I don't think they got any kind of data like that, did they?
Who did?
Hestalin?
I don't know.
Oh, the Hestalin lights, they were actually, I think, Hestalin, I think it's Norway.
Oh, okay.
They had a university set up a study there. They got some really amazing pictures with polarized light to try and examine them. It's been a while since I looked into that.
But we were still seeing in that time period a lot more humanoid encounters in France than in the U.S., right?
Yeah, but like I said, in 1955, you get the Kelly Hopkinsville goblins, and then there's I've got a whole chapter about that where Isabel Davis and Ted Blocher, I don't know how to pronounce his name properly, Bloecher. They put out a publication in 1973 all about humanoid reports in the States, starting in 1955. So.
Okay, let's look at, this is one of the things I noticed, and it starts with Kenneth Arnold and the flying saucer thing, but how much do you think that the errors in reporting, like saying, nicknaming them flying saucers and stuff, have affected our perception of what UFOs are?
Misreporting?
Right, where they, like, like the flying saucer. There was another thing you mentioned in here that they reported, and it wasn't actually what was seen, and I didn't make a note as to what it was. So, but I mean, like flying saucers took off, even though what Kenneth Arnold saw were V-shaped things.
Yeah, and very early on in 1947, everything was a disc. Whether it was people were bringing in radar targets, 6-pointed radar targets, and they called it a disc in the press. So yeah, I'm sure that had an influence. But you wanted to one thing you wanted to talk about was the law. Oh yeah, but in France.
The other I did make a note. Because you said, as the story made its way from newspaper to newspaper, and you just mentioned this, Dewilde being paralyzed by fear turned into Dewilde being paralyzed by a beam of light. And then you see that sort of perpetrate in other encounters after that. And it may very well be the reflective nature of this phenomena, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that these things have changed, just word of mouth, it changes, and then it becomes like the accepted explanation of what people saw, even though it wasn't.
Yeah. It's folklore, really. A good deal of this is folklore. That's why I like the subject. It's history, it's folklore, it's mysticism. I've said before, you can look at it through many different pairs of glasses.
The law in France. Let's talk about that, because that's great.
Yeah, in October of 1954, the mayor of the town of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, he passed a law prohibiting flying saucers flying over, landing, or taking off in community territory. Article 2 states, any aircraft known as flying saucer or flying cigar, which should land on the territory of the community, will be immediately held in custody. And that responsibility was put in Article 3 on the forest officer and the city policeman. So if a saucer landed, the city policeman or the forest officer had the responsibility of taking them to task.
Yeah, and I'm sure that went very well. One of the things
but it's still on the books. That's what's funny about it. I recently read an article about that. Well, I say recently. I'm an old man, so recently could have been 5 years ago.
5 years ago seems like yesterday, I think, to most people because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
That sense of time has just got warped.
Yep.
So I did have a note about Hopkinsville. One of the things you say is Greenwell said that he and several men did see a luminous spot in the grass where one of the creatures was reportedly shot, but it was only visible from a certain angle and not detectable when viewed at close range. And I don't think I've heard that detail before, and that's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. It's really interesting.
Because that's not something that it sounds like someone would make up. They might say, oh, I saw a glowing spot in the grass, but that you could only see at a certain angle and you couldn't see it when you got up close? Yeah,
that was the chief of police of Hopkinsville, Russell Greenwell. And Russell Greenwell was actually open to the whole thing because he had a sighting earlier himself. I think he was vacationing at a lake with his wife, and he saw a mysterious object there. So when this was dropped in his lap, he was actually woken up in the middle of the night because the families that were besieged by these creatures at a moment where things were quiet, they ran in a panic and drove down in a panic and piled into two cars and drove to the police station in a panic. And the guy on duty there was so, impressed by how freaked out these people were that he called Russell Greenwell and got him out of bed. And he came down to the station, and then they all went on mass with a whole bunch of other townsfolk and went to the farmhouse, Glennie Langford's farmhouse, and did their investigation. But I'm looking for the part.
This is also where the term "little green men" comes from, is Hopkinsville.
Yeah, I've seen speculation that it's because of the name Kelly Green, Kelly Green Men, kind of got that going. They reported they were silver,
Yeah. But again, this is another one of those things that, like, they reported it silver, but yet it turns into little green men. V-shaped objects become saucers.
Yeah. It's pretty funny. Well, it's interesting. I shouldn't say funny. It's interesting that
because people don't go back to the original sources. They just kind of go with the most popular view of whatever subject, whatever we're talking about. You actually go back to the original sources on all this stuff.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing. That I write the weekly blog for Martin Willis over at Podcast UFO, and yeah, it became an obsession with me. I've found now I know where to look, but I get to a point where it's like, oh, where did this come from?
Yeah.
And oftentimes you get totally contradictory elements of the report. And, there are three different versions of this story. It's like, well, which one's right? And in order to find that, I got obsessed with getting back as close to the original source as I could. And, when you do that, you get a clearer picture of what the witnesses actually said they experienced. And it's still, it's still a great story. Just as fascinating without all the embellishment.
Yeah.
I think far more fascinating.
And that's what I was getting at before, like how much the UFO field is made up of things that are embellishments as much as stuff that actually happened.
Yeah. That's I like approaching it as an historian because this is the stuff that's actually on the record.
Yeah.
In the investigators' files, in the original newspaper articles, police reports, Air Force files, etc.
Have you ever found like a bigger story that you weren't able to find the original stuff for?
I had trouble with the Japan stories.
Okay.
I got stuck in Japan. There were some really cool stories out of Japan that it's not in the book. These are some recent blogs I wrote. One interesting, a guy claimed to have encountered, heard some noise. His dog was barking and he opened his front door and there standing in front of him was a creature that looked like it was completely covered in a transparent vinyl suit. It had a head, and right under the head, just like a cephalopod, it had 4 tentacles. It stood on 2 of them and used the other 2 as arms.
Oh.
And I thought, this is cool. And the guy got, claimed to have been abducted. And then, he broke away, and then he was thrown out of the craft. And then got messages to go to a certain mountain, Mount Kitaro, I think it was. And he brought 2 friends, told them they were going hiking. And then he broke off from them and had a rendezvous with a saucer that took him up to Saturn and then to Titan. Creature gave him a rock, and then he gave the rock to local authorities to be examined, and they said it was a mineral from some of the local quarries, and he was ridiculed for it.
Yeah.
But then he later claimed to have develop the abilities to teleport himself and move things with his mind, spoon bending, and I was like, wow, this is fascinating. It's one of those things where maybe something really happened to him initially, and then later he embellished it, and because he was just a simple farmer, and getting that attention might have just blown his head up and caused him to make the story bigger than it was.
Sure.
But it was
what year was that?
I think 75, if I remember correctly. But a famous Japanese researcher, I think his name was Kinichi. He was reported to be the guy who investigated the case. And recently in Fukushima, they opened up a UFO museum and the International UFO Research Organization. So I reached out to them, because they have all his archives. Kinichi Arai, that's his name. So they have Kinichi Arai's archives there. So I reached out to them and I said, look, I'm writing this story. I'd like to, know if you have any kind of documentation or anything from Arai. And, they made a big deal in the press of being, an international research organization. And their reply was a form letter completely in Japanese. So in the spirit of international cooperation.
So you weren't actually able to find the source?
No, I had to write, I wrote it like that. I said, this is basically, this is a great story. This is the researcher. I tried, and these gentlemen weren't of much help. So,
and what happens in a lot of those cases, you see it a lot with poltergeist cases, is that the person has something real happen to them, but then they like the attention. So when the phenomena stops, they start faking it, or they start making stuff up.
Yeah, what were those two sisters? The original.
Enfield. Is that what you're thinking of?
No. It was earlier. There were a couple of sisters who claimed to be communicating and.
The Knox.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, that was right up here too.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was like right at the birth of the spiritualism movement.
I'm totally
they were caught faking, but a lot of people have speculated that maybe they were seeing something, experiencing something real, and then later
I don't know if they were caught. The one girl admitted faking it, but the other ones said that they didn't.
Well, apparently they were cracking their foot knuckles.
Yeah, which is impressive in its own right.
Yes, but so the speculation is that when they were put on the spot to perform, they were forced to fake it.
Yeah.
But that's just an endless loop.
Right. Exactly. So one of the stories I really liked in here, and I don't know if you don't remember it, I actually copied it here, but it's a guy named Blocher, Bloecher.
Yeah. Ted. Ted Blocher. Or Blocher. Yeah, his he was in the biz for quite a while. He joined CUFOS after Center for UFO Studies. After he started off as a member of Civilian Saucer Intelligence, and after that folded, he stuck with it, and he joined the Center for UFO Studies as well. Yeah, he was friends with Leonard Stringfield. And Leonard Stringfield was getting reports, and he went to visit Stringfield, and they had all these up in Cincinnati. He and Stringfield went and investigated humanoid reports throughout Cincinnati. He was also a co-author with Les Meebane and David Webb of the 1979 CUFOS publication, The Humanoid Catalog. And his archives are in the New York Public Library, the main branch in Manhattan, with Patience and Fortitude, the two lions in front of it, the famous one. So his archives are stored there. I'm sorry, what was the story you were interested in?
The story was the one with a guy named Robert Honeycutt.
Oh, yeah.
I have it here if you don't remember it.
No, I got it. Yeah, I did. Those are the really cool creatures.
Yeah.
He thought there were three guys praying. He was driving, and off to the side of the road, he sees these three figures. One of them was holding up his hands, and he had something in it. It seemed these sparks were jumping from one hand to the other, and then he bent down, and it seemed to tie it around his ankle. But they described their faces as they had these wrinkles that ran across the front of their foreheads, and their mouths he described like frogs. And they had this one big bulge on their right side, and their right arm seemed to be longer to accommodate this bulge. So yeah, some really strange creatures. He was freaked out about it enough that he drove to the house of I think that's the one.
That's the one.
Yeah, he drove to the chief of police.
Yes.
Yeah, 4 a.m. He woke the chief of police up to tell him what he'd experienced. The chief of police was impressed enough that he went out to investigate himself.
And then he didn't, but there was nothing there when they went back, right?
Yeah, no, nothing.
Yeah, that one, I love that one because that doesn't sound like something someone would make up.
Yeah, it's just so weird. The creatures don't match anything anybody had reported before, and it's so specific. And then another thing, too, that kept coming up throughout these reports were smells.
Yeah.
Which shows up a lot. I think Josh Cutchin,
yes.
Didn't he? Yeah, he wrote a whole thing about smells.
The Brimstone Deceipt.
Yeah, so this one was fresh cut alfalfa with a slight trace of almonds. But, you also had, bad smells like sulfur and all the usuals.
Yeah, Josh found the most common smell was that of sulfur, which, I mean, it's the smell of decay, which makes me wonder if whatever creates these things, like whatever energy they're using to manifest here, immediately starts decaying.
Yeah, who knows?
So you had another one from Blocher with two boys wrestling on the lawn.
Oh, yeah, this is one. Yeah, this is all in the publication, the Kufos publication, the Kelly 1955 Kelly Hopkinsville incident, and the Kelly, I'm gonna find it. Close Encounters at Kelly and Others of 1955. So Isabel Davis wrote about Kelly, and she was an awesome investigator. Her investigation absolutely thorough with documentation from the Air Force, maps of the property, diagrams, and just, really, really thorough investigation. Super impressive, especially for that time. And Blocher wrote the thing on Others of 1955. So the Honeycutt Case comes from Blocher's portion of the book. So yeah, the kids. This was in California, and this was a just really, really strange case.
I have it here if you want me to read it.
No, they were wrestling on the lawn, and they saw first thing they saw was a hemispherical object. It became fully round and trailed rays as it moved. Then the other kids started seeing it, and then they started seeing other objects like round like basketballs, all kinds of different colors, red, blue, orange. Says most are silver. And when they appeared or disappeared, musical ping each time. And when they were visible, they were semi-transparent. And they started seeing entities as well. One 3.5 feet tall, transparent, big red mouth and red eyes. And they panicked, started running around screaming. And mother came out and ran into one of the kids. And she described seeing nothing like what they described. But at one point, a 7-year-old boy got transfixed by one of the objects, by the beauty of it. And he started walking towards it, and two of the older boys tripped him and held him down. And then another boy saw a child-sized arm 20 feet away beckoning. Then a creature wearing satin-like clothing appeared, and it spoke to a boy named Ronnie and told him to climb a tree where he would be picked up 15 minutes from them. And he and another boy climbed the tree and waited with fixed stares. The other kids were begging them to come down. They said a craft approached with a fixed outer rim and a rotating center, and riding around the rim were little men, and the craft made a swishing sounds. The kids got a garden hose and turned it on the kids, the boys, to get them down from the tree. One kid climbed down. The other one slid off to a nearby roof and walked off the edge and landed on his head. It said unhurt in the report from Blocher. This was also made the local newspapers as well. And he had no memory of what happened to him, and he didn't believe the others when they tried to describe the events to him. Blocher's assessment was that there is lack of sufficient information to come to any final conclusions.
Yeah, it's kind of the definition of high strangeness right there.
Oh my, yeah, that's an amazing case.
And the fact that what was the mother seeing? Was she seeing something but not what they were seeing?
That wasn't really clear. I don't think she saw anything.
Yeah, that's even more fascinating.
Yeah.
Because clearly there was something going on with the boys.
Yeah, I think later I actually saw the newspaper article after I had written the book. But yeah, I didn't get any more information than this.
Okay. I wrote down the Philadelphia experiment. I don't remember what you covered about this in your book.
Oh, yeah, that was, I think that goes all the way back to Morris K. Jessup. He was one of the founders of NICAP, believe it or not. Morris K. Jessup, T. Townsend Brown, who claimed to have developed anti-gravity. He was actually the first director before Keyhoe. One of the rumors is that he was ousted because the board members thought he might be siphoning money from NICAP towards his anti-gravity research. So they booted him and put in Keyhoe. But when I mentioned Morris K. Jessup, I felt obligated to go further to explain Morris K. Jessup and talk about the Philadelphia experiment. That really came about because the Navy, I think it was the Office of Naval Intelligence? The Office of Naval Research received a copy of Morris K. Jessup's book, the 1955 book, The Case for the UFO. The main thing in that book is that he was considering possible sources of power and propulsion for UFOs. So a copy was sent to the Office of Naval Research anonymously, and sections were highlighted, and there were annotations in the margins with 3 different ink colors to make it look like it was written by 3 different individuals. Mm-hmm. They seemed to be concerned with how much Jessup knew, particularly about anti-gravity and electromagnetism. Then Jessup started getting letters signed Carl Allen and Carlos Miguel Allende over the address, and the writer claimed to have witnessed an experiment in Philadelphia, which has become famous by our friend, by Mr. Bill Moore, that a Navy destroyer, the USS Eldridge, was teleported to Norfolk, Virginia, and back. And when it got back to Philadelphia, the story goes that their crew fused to the decks, the metal decks, and just all kinds of awfulness and ugliness. Ultimately, the guy's name was Carl Allen. He actually, in 1969, walked into APRO headquarters and admitted the letters were a hoax. And then later he recanted. Jim Moseley found him in Prescott, Arizona in 1977, and he wrote a letter to Gray Barker. Barker convinced Allen to come to Clarksburg, and he put him up at the Clarksburg Sheraton, and he interviewed him on tape with Moseley present. And on the tape, Allen speaks as if the Philadelphia event is an historical facts, but he admits to writing all the annotations in the book. So, and that tape is in the Gray Barker collection at the Clarksburg Harrison Public Library. And that's the story of the Philadelphia experiment.
I remember John Keel in some talk or something saying how the people, the surviving, sailors from that ship get together every year and laugh about all the different conspiracy stories that are out about what happened at the Philadelphia experiment.
Well, apparently the ship wasn't even docked in Philadelphia at the time. I think that's been proven.
So, but it's one of those things that people love to hear about. It's one of those things that really has staying power, that story.
It's a good yarn.
Let's see. I took a snippet here that says the Levelland case had exceptional witnesses, including a sheriff and a fire chief. Do you know what I'm talking about here?
Yeah,
okay.
That's true. What had happened? It started off in Levelland, Texas. They have a harvest season, and during the harvest season, everybody's busy and working overnight and late at night. So these two, I think they were Spanish workers. They reported seeing they actually called the police and reported that they saw this huge object fly over them. When it did so, their car went out, and that was a repeated report throughout the Levelland events. But yeah, among the witnesses were a fire chief and I'm having trouble finding it here.
Including a sheriff and a fire chief. A careful science-based investigation could have helped NICAP's argument for the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Unfortunately, NICAP's man on the scene was James A. Lee. Lee was an eccentric who had his own ideas about the nature of the universe due to decades of studying all sort of esoteric books. He believed that space was made up of ether, that the vortex of the ethers held all things on Earth, and that tornadoes were caused by leftover energy from God's creation of the Earth.
Yeah. And he also drove around George Van Tassel's space convention in a Cadillac with all kinds of electronic equipment. He claimed to be able to monitor any aliens that might be eavesdropping.
Yeah. So eccentric, to say the least.
Oh, yeah.
There were the sightings of Father William Booth Gill. This was in Australia, if I remember right.
Boinai, Papua New Guinea.
Oh, New Guinea. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, he was a missionary from the Australian Anglican Church.
Okay, that's where the Australian part comes in.
Yeah, and he was the head of a mission in Boinai, Papua New Guinea. And then it was a territory of Australia. So he reported on April 9th. At first, he was in a boat. He saw something in the mountains. He saw a light. And he thought it was from a Tilly lamp, which is a high-pressure kerosene lantern. And he thought it was strange that someone would be that high up. Then he looked up. Light was gone. Then he saw it appear about a mile east of where it had been. So he considered that he might have seen a flying saucer. Then on June 21st, his assistant, Stephen Moy, he reported seeing an object shaped like an upside-down saucer over the mission. So Gill, kind of blew all this stuff off. He said, it could be just natural phenomenon. And he wrote a letter to a friend of his, the Reverend David Jury, and he included a report of Stephen Moy's sighting and said he does not doubt that these things, in quotes, exist, but he says, my simple mind still requires physical evidence before I can accept the from outer space theory. And he signed the letter Doubting William, but he didn't get a chance to send the letter. Before he sent the letter on Friday, June 26, 1959, 6:45 p.m., a huge light caught his eye. And he called to a student, asked him what he saw. The student confirmed, and he said, go get Stephen Moy. When Stephen Moy came back, he came back with a whole group of people, and they all had this sighting. And Gill had the foresight to go out and get a notepad, and he wrote a log detailing everything they saw. What he reports in his log was seeing four what he calls men on top of the saucer. And ultimately, they appeared to be working on it. They would go in, go out, and in his log, he wrote down the order in which they would appear and then seem to go back into the saucer. Well, at one point, they went in and then they came out later, and they saw the saucer there again. And one of somebody started waving, and the creatures waved back. So you have all these witnesses claiming that, they waved at the saucermen and the saucermen waved back. Yeah. And this made the papers big time, international. This actually, everybody like APRO, Jim and Coral Lorenzen at APRO were super impressed. Ray Barker was super impressed. Everybody was, all the investigators were writing about this in their publications, and NICAP didn't touch it. And NICAP, their membership, wrote some nasty letters, and one in particular says, "What? Donald Keyhoe will not accept the word of a man of the cloth." How close does a saucer have to get before, how close can a saucer get before Keyhoe dismisses it. So, there were two things. Like there was an instance where Keyhoe did report on, I think it was a mother and daughter seeing a saucer that was fairly close, but not as close as this one, and certainly with not little men waving at them. Right. Well, they weren't little. They did. But what was really interesting about this case to me was how well Gill investigated it. One thing he did is when he was looking at it, he spread out his thumb and pinky and held out his hand to a certain distance where the saucer fit right in there. And then with his students, estimated how far he thought the craft was from them, found a building that fit between his thumb and forefinger, and his thumb and pinky pasted off and got the size of the building. So he estimated the size of the saucer based on that. So you have his log and you have that, also estimating the size of the humanoids. So it's really interesting. It was really interesting to me that, he took the time to investigate this pretty thoroughly and,
yeah. And
became
I was going to say, why do you think Keyhoe just ignored it?
Because it had humanoids.
It's such a weird, boundary to go by. I mean, if you believe these things, did Keyhoe believe they were extraterrestrial?
Yeah, he wrote his second book was Flying Saucers from Outer Space.
Yeah. So why would you, I mean, obviously if they're from outer space, they have to have, people in them of some sort.
Yeah, that was the constant criticism he got. He even had trouble with the Hill case, big time. He put it on the back page of the UFO Investigator. It came up as part of an article on people basically getting injured. Yeah, it was the article in a 1962 article, UFOs Cause Panic, One Death. The Hill story is just part of that article. And the Hill story hadn't really broke by then. Yeah, it didn't break until 1965 when the journalist John H. Luttrell published their story without their approval in the October 25th, 1965 Boston Traveler. Then UPI picked it up and it blew up. Keyhoe's a subcommittee actually looked into that, a NICAP subcommittee. That's what he called little groups all over the country. It was a really cool network. But yeah, once the story broke, having taken their licks, in December 1965, Investigator had the story on page 5, and I wrote, the Hill story is dangerously close to those of the contactees, but it received a lot of publicity, and it seems that NICAP is reporting it despite having misgivings. And in the article, it's pointed out that NICAP will report on the story, quote, in line with our new investigation program. The reader is then told this does not, caps in the original, mean that we accept the abduction claim. So, yeah, they withheld a conclusion and said if the writer said if and when the psychiatrist releases his findings or the Hills give us permission to use them, we will report all available information.
Nice.
So, they begrudgingly looked into that. But later, though, Blocher got involved with them much later, and they turned around. They started reporting on humanoid reports. I think that was after Blue Book folded and they were dying their slow death.
UFO injuries are interesting because they seem to start at a certain point, and they definitely seem to be more in like South America and stuff like that.
Well, yeah. Well, that was Pratt. What's his first name? Ken Pratt. He wrote a book about it, Terror and Death in Brazil, I believe it's called. He was actually a really thorough investigator. He worked for the National Enquirer, so he had a paying gig with them. But his investigations were really good. Yeah, UFO Danger Zone, Bob Pratt.
Yeah.
Yeah, Terror and Death in Brazil, Where Next? Yeah, I mean that was all in the 1970s though. But the stories are just horrendous and bizarre. Like people being pulled up by them is a very common report. Like one guy grabbed to a tree and he was pulled up, and then apparently the tractor beam or whatever wasn't powerful enough, and he slid back down the tree, and then he was pulled up again, and he slid back down the tree. So he had these horrible abrasions all over his chest. And yeah, that's I recommend that book. It's really amazing.
But you got to wonder why, like, South America has these more violent UFO encounters when other places don't. Like, why the difference?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's you could say it's cultural. You could say it's because they have a strong shamanistic aspect to their culture. With the indigenous population. You're aware of Alan Stevelman's Witness to Another World?
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, he makes that tie directly. But it's all of a sudden in America, though, in 1964, people started getting zapped and burned during their encounters.
Yeah.
And I wrote about that in chapter 16, Overt Contact. I titled it Overt Contact, which I think was, I got that from an article in the NICAP publication, the UFO Investigator. My particular, I think it's kind of horrible to say favorite, but one I found extremely interesting is the case of James Flynn. He was, this March 17th, yes, it was 1965, yeah. He was a 45-year-old rancher from Fort Myers, Florida. And he walked into a local ophthalmologist's office. The area around his eyes were swollen. His right eye looked like a bloody marble. So this guy was messed up. And according to him, on Friday, March 12th, he set out for the Everglades on a hunting trip. So a guy's going out alone in the Everglades. He was driving a swamp buggy with 4 dogs. So this is a tough guy, to be willing to spend, he spent 3 days there.
Yeah.
Well, it was actually, no, I think it was 4 days, but the prospect of spending, an extended period of time in the Everglades with all the alligators, et cetera, is just, that's a special breed.
Yes.
But so his dogs took off, and he went looking for them in a swamp buggy. He had 3 took off, and he had one in a cage with him, and he saw a bright light above some cypress trees. It moved back and forth, and then descended. And then remained hovering about 4 feet off the ground. He got out his binoculars. He kept on driving until he was about a quarter mile away. He turned off his buggy lights so he can get a better look. And he described seeing this cone-shaped object with a rounded top. And he estimated it to be around 30 feet tall, twice as wide at the base. He estimated based on the surrounding cypress trees. And it seemed to be made of pieces of metal, 4 feet by 4 feet, held together by rivets. Had rows of windows from which emerged a yellowish light. And he said an orange-red glow was underneath. He watched it for about half an hour, then started up the buggy, got closer. He got within a few yards of the lit area, turned off the motor and lights. The dog started freaking out, gnawing at the cage. And he walked to the edge of the object, and the edge of the light, and he waved. So instead of humanoids waving back, he said a short beam of light shot out from below the windows. It hit him in the forehead and knocked him unconscious. So he came to 24 hours later. He had no idea it had been that long. So the dog had nearly destroyed the cage, and he saw marks around the buggy indicating that he had crawled around it.
Yeah.
So and he managed to get back to Fort Myers. He was blind in his right eye, had blurred vision in his left. and it took him until 4 p.m. on Wednesday to arrive. And when he got to the doctor's office, it was then that he realized that it was 24 hours later than he thought it was. So the thing is that all these people vouch for this guy's credibility. His personal physician had known him for 25 years, and he wrote a letter to APRO saying he considered Flynn to be reliable, emotionally stable individual. But the really cool thing about this is he was also vouched for by, I think, a police chief. But what's really cool about this is that he went back. He took a local, NICAP looked into this as well. The sheriff vouched for him, but they went back to investigate, I think, with the NICAP member, and what they described was these scrape marks down the trees that seemed to go for about 4 feet and then just stop. And the tops of the cypress trees were burned, and there was a big, I think, 75-foot burned circle. Yeah. So it's a pretty awesome case.
Yeah, and again, it fits in that high strangeness thing. Like, why did this particular thing hurt him when normally they don't hurt people?
Yeah, exactly.
See, we got time for another story.
But it's also another thing that strikes me a bit about all these cases is that there should be medical. I think that the investigators at the time really dropped the ball and didn't get the medical reports.
Yeah.
Or any photocopies of the medical reports. So I couldn't find them in the files. So I think that's a big thing that just got missed.
Absolutely. So someone I wasn't actually that familiar with until I read your book was McDonald. And he seemed to really push a lot of stuff forwards. Or at least try to. Yeah,
and he came to a nasty end.
Yeah.
But he became obsessed with the subject and traveled around and lectured a lot, and that put some distance between him and his wife, and she ended up having an affair, and they ended up, think they divorced. He was a prominent atmospheric physicist, and he got interested in the subject in, I think, 1958. He lived in Tucson, Arizona, and 1957. Yeah, he was no, that's Androffel. Excuse me.
That's right.
1958. He started investigating, and there were a bunch of sightings in Tucson. So he put the word out. He started, finding witnesses and talking to them, and the word got out that here's a guy that will listen to you if you tell him you saw something.
Right.
So he stuck with it, but he kept it quiet. But in 1966, once the word was out that the Air Force was looking for somebody a university to do a study. Basically, after being hauled in front of Congress, and this is the Michigan swamp gas episode where Alan Hynek, was taken. The Air Force was taken to task. Gerald Ford was the Michigan representative at the time, and the House Minority Speaker, and he was really upset by Hynek's explanations and thought they were flippant, and urged a couple of groups to a couple of committees. You guys should hold hearings on this. I think it was the Senate Armed Services Committee ended up holding the hearings. But in any case, the result of the hearings was Congress being told that a scientific research committee had recommended to the Air Force that they get a university study going, an independent study. Essentially, they said, "Well, we should do that. We should." So that they in front of Congress said that they were thinking of taking the committee's advice and actually getting a university to do a scientific study. And then, since it's on the public record, they were under pressure to actually follow through on that, and that resulted in the infamous Condon Committee at the University of Colorado.
Right.
So that was 1966, the word got out. And at that point, McDonald decided that he would go public because saucers all of a sudden got an air of respectability. He was hoping to get a grant from the from the NAS, I think the National Academy of Sciences. Mm-hmm. It fell through because they thought that, well, if it would look bad if it looked like they didn't have faith in the Air Force funded study or the Air Force. It would look like they didn't have faith by giving this guy a grant to do his own research. So his grant fell through. But he was working with the Office of Naval Research. He was being funded by the Office of Naval Research. His contract monitor, Jim Hughes, he had written to Jim Hughes saying that he understood that he was on a list to help with the study, but he had a run-in with the Air Force earlier because they were going to put up missile silos upwind of Tucson, and he got together with Barry Goldwater and who was the governor at the time, and I think, and the mayor of Tucson, and took tried to get the Air Force to put the silos downwind. They failed, but the result was that from then on in, the Air Force put the silos downwind of major cities. So he thought this put him on didn't have him sitting in favorably with the Air Force. So he's probably not going to be a guy they came to look into the subject scientifically. But Hughes wrote him back saying they were interested in what they called remote sensing of the atmosphere. And he suggested that laser observations of anomalous clouds could help clear up some unidentified reports. And he asked McDonald if he could use some of his spare time and look at the Blue Book files and give the Office of Naval Research an assessment based on the data. And because he would be working on the ONR's behalf, Hughes told him he could charge his travel expenses to his contract. Mm-hmm. So McDonald was off to the Project Blue Book offices. Well, what happened was he was given access to the files, and he went through the files, and he was appalled by some of the explanations in the files, such as marsh gas, ball lightning, right. Venus, the whole rigmarole. And he also saw that J. Allen Hynek had signed off on a lot of these. So he took Hynek to task for this. He set up a meeting with Hynek. Their first conversation was him telling, Hynek praising APRO and him praising McDonald praising NICAP. McDonald was actually a member of NICAP, which is not publicized at all by NICAP, or it doesn't show up in newspaper accounts or anything. I actually had it's mentioned, I think APRO mentioned it once in the bulletin that he was a NICAP member, but they kind of didn't play that up. I actually had to get that confirmed. I think Barry Greenwood confirmed that for me. But they really didn't talk about that, which I found interesting.
Yeah.
So McDonald was a NICAP man. And what's interesting is APRO was based in Tucson at the time, and McDonald just, there's no association between them. So it's interesting. There might have been whether there was any kind of rancor between them or not. And I couldn't get any information on that, but that's intriguing. But in any case, Hynek was an APRO man, and McDonald was a NICAP man. So from the get-go, they were basically at odds, because Hynek didn't think much of NICAP, especially being under contract with the Air Force, and NICAP just hammered the Air Force and hammered him incessantly. But in any case, they made arrangements to meet at Northwestern University, and McDonald went out to Northwestern University, where at the time, Jacques Vallee was working there as well. Hynek had alerted Vallee to a job for a computer systems programmer, and Vallee took the job because he wanted to work closely with Hynek, and that's where they started what's been known as called the Invisible College.
Right.
But Hynek wrote about the first meeting in Forbidden Science, the edition covering that period, and McDonald just laid into Hynek, and Vallee stepped up and defended him, and really called him out and said, as a scientist, basically you should be ashamed of yourself. Why don't you come forward? Well, Hynek actually did afterwards. Hynek started coming out in the press more favorably towards flying saucers, UFOs at that point.
And it seems like he did that. He did that with the guy running Project Blue Book as well.
Hector Quintanilla.
Yeah, I don't know how to say his last name. Like, he's just very blunt with people. He doesn't pull his punches. Yeah,
I think it's actually Quintanilla. Okay. He shows up on UFOs. It Has Begun, the Rod Serling narrated documentary, which has its own strange backstory, but that's another rabbit hole. I say I'm so used to saying Quintanilla. It sounds far more Spanish. But in any case, McDonald really hammered on Quintanilla, especially for his handling of the Dale Spar case. Dale Spar and his partner chased a UFO from Portage County, Ohio for 86 miles all the way into Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And a whole bunch of other police joined the chase, and there were all sorts of witnesses. Basically a metallic craft. It started late. It started 4:30 a.m. and as the light came up, Spar reported that he could make out an actual metallic object with an antenna. And this thing seemed to slow down, let them catch up, and then take off again. Let them chase it. Quintanilla came up with the explanation that they had seen a satellite. Then their eyes followed it and locked on to Venus, and that they chased Venus all the way into Pennsylvania. He interviewed. He first called Dale Spar, and his opening remark to Spar was, "Tell me about this mirage you saw," and then talked to him for 2.5 minutes. Then called him again and talked to him for 1.5 minutes. And then called later to and I think he gave the police chief the explanation, and it's reported that the police chief laughed out loud. And a stink was raised by local officials there, and went all the way up to the Pentagon. They said, send somebody down there and do a proper investigation. So that somebody was Quintanilla. So he did due diligence and interviewed him had him fill out a questionnaire, and then stuck to the satellite and Venus story.
Yeah.
So this was in the record, and McDonald in particular hammered him on that. And McDonald kept notes, and the McDonald story is told by Ann Druffel, who was started with NICAP in 1957. And Druffel's book is thoroughly researched. She got access to McDonald's notes, and he kept all these little notebooks with him at all times and made little notes. So she had access to that. And in his notes, he just writes about just being completely bewildered at Quintanilla's stubbornness to stick to that explanation despite the report. It got heated. He got into a big fight with Quintanilla to the point where the secretary got upset and ran out of the room. Vallee described him as a bull in the china shop.
Yeah.
And I kind of got the impression that he might have been a bit manic depressive.
Oh, okay. Well, we are out of time for this. You okay sticking around for a Patreon segment to finish a couple of these?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Where can people find you online?
Well, I write a weekly blog for Martin Willis at podcastufo.com. And do an audio blog version of that as well, and is posted on his YouTube site. And the books at Amazon.com, audiobook, Kindle, hardcover, softcover. Yeah. And I think you can find it at flyingdiscpress.com as well.
And you are Charles Lear, and the book is The Flying Saucer Investigators.
Okay, well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking.
I want to take a moment here to thank all of my Patreons. Without you, this show wouldn't be possible. And I especially want to shout out to those pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Super Infomans, 36 Dingo, Chuck Shutters, Leanne Sherry, CJ, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, land of the crazy and communicable, Christopher Ernst, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, Crystal Ann Compton, Diane B., Duffy Dowder, Edu Camahort, Empty K, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, Joanna Rojas, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, MJ Armstrong, Jim and Sophie, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Matt in Delaware, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Stone Wilderness, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Vincent Trewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, Ren Collier, Stephen D., and Amber Hall. Thank you all so very, very much. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Charles Lear. There is a Patreon segment, so Patreons will be getting that later in the week. If you want to become a patron, it really helps out the show a great deal. It's only $3 a month. And you can go to wheredidtheroadgo.com and just click on the big Patreon graphic to get there. I really appreciate all of my patrons, and you get extra stuff pretty much every week. Sometimes more than once. There's also merch and stuff on the website, links to all the social media sites. Yeah, pretty much anything you could want to find can be found at wheredidtheroadgo.com, including shows going all the way back to the very first one in January of 2013. We're coming up on 10 years this coming January. All right, I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.